call came at 6:47 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I'd just poured my first cup of coffee and set it on the kitchen counter. That old chipped mug my wife gave me the year we moved into this house 31 years ago. The phone rang, and I saw my son's name on the screen. Wesley. I smiled a little, the way you do when your kid calls out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning. You think, maybe he just wants to talk. He didn't just want to talk. Dad. His voice was tight. Strange. It's Amanda. She fell down the stairs at the house. We're at Mercy General. Dad, they're saying it might be a spinal injury. I set down the mug. Coffee sloshed over the rim. I'm on my way, I said. I drove the 22 minutes to Mercy General on autopilot, the kind of driving where you arrive and you don't remember a single traffic light. My daughter-in-law, Amanda, she was 34 years old, laughed too loud at her own jokes, made my son happier than I'd ever seen him. She used to call me every Father's Day, before she even called her own father. I loved that woman like she was my own. The hospital smell hit me the second the automatic doors opened. That specific combination of antiseptic and recycled air that I will never in my life get used to. A nurse at the front desk pointed me toward the elevator. 3rd floor, room 318. I stepped off the elevator and my son was standing in the hallway. Wesley, 41 years old, wearing a wrinkled button-down like he'd grabbed it off the floor, and he looked tired, not scared. That was the first thing I noticed. A man whose wife is in a hospital bed with a possible spinal injury should look scared. Wesley looked tired, like a man who'd stayed up planning something. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was reading things into nothing. He hugged me. She's stable, he said. They're running more tests. The surgeon thinks she might need an operation on her L4 vertebra. What happened? I asked. You said she fell? On the stairs. You know how she always runs down them too fast. I nodded. I didn't say anything else. A nurse came around the corner of the hallway right then. Young woman, maybe 30, dark hair pulled back, small build, name badge that said Priscilla. She glanced at me, then at my son, and something shifted in her face. Just for a second, something careful and deliberate, like someone who'd just made a decision. She looked back at me. Sir, are you her father-in-law? I am, I said. Dr. Harmon is tied up right now, she said to my son. There's a consent form in the nurse's station if you want to go ahead and sign while you wait for him. She paused. I can show you where. Wesley looked at me. I'll be right back, Dad. You can go in and sit with her. He followed Priscilla down the hallway. I watched them go. Amanda was lying in the bed with monitors and an IV line, eyes half open, a foam neck brace fitted under her chin. She looked at me when I came in and she tried to smile. I sat down and took her hand and told her she was going to be fine, the way you say things when you don't know if they're true, but you need them to be. She squeezed my hand once, weakly. My son came back 15 minutes later. Different nurse followed him to the door, handed him a copy of something, and left. Wesley tucked the papers into his jacket pocket without looking at me. Later, much later, I would learn what was on those papers. I stayed at the hospital until 9 that night. I drove home through the dark, past the exit ramp I've taken 10,000 times, past the Sunoco station on the corner that's been there since Reagan was president. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long time. I am 67 years old. I spent 33 years as a licensed CPA, the last 15 of them as a senior partner at a mid-sized accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio. I worked with insurance claims. I worked with workers' comp cases. I reviewed medical billing fraud for a federal audit one time. And I sat in a deposition room with a U.S. attorney and went through hospital billing records line by line. I know what certain paperwork looks like. The consent form my son signed before the surgeon even examined her, that wasn't standard. That was fast. That was the kind of fast that has a reason behind it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I went inside. I poured the cold coffee down the drain and went to bed. Priscilla called me the next morning at 7:15. She'd found my number through the admissions intake form. I was listed as Amanda's emergency contact, secondary, after Wesley. Her voice was low. Careful. Mr. Aldridge, she said. I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand I'm taking a real risk making this call. I sat up in bed. Go ahead. Your daughter-in-law's imaging results from yesterday. The radiologist's preliminary notes indicated no acute spinal injury. Minor soft tissue bruising, consistent with a low-impact fall. Nothing that would ordinarily require surgery. I didn't speak. The attending surgeon who came in this morning, she said, is Dr. Fitch. I have seen Dr. Fitch twice in the last year on cases that proceeded to surgery on what I would call very thin justification. Both times, the primary caregiver on file, the spouse, was deeply involved in the billing process before the procedure even began. She paused. I'm not making accusations. I have a feeling, Mr. Aldridge, and I thought someone in the family should know what I know before anything moves forward. I asked her one question. Was my son there when the imaging results came back? Long pause. He was in Dr. Fitch's office for about 40 minutes, right before the results were posted in the system, she said. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the window for a very long time. My son. My Wesley. The boy I taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of Westgate Elementary. The boy who cried at his mother's funeral and couldn't get through the eulogy, and I had to put my arm around him and finish the words myself. That boy. I didn't want it to be true. I am a patient man. I have always been a patient man. 33 years in accounting will do that to you. You learn to follow the numbers, not your emotions, because emotions will lead you to the wrong conclusion every single time. So I did not call my son. I did not call my son. I did not confront anyone. I drove to the hospital at 10 a.m. like a concerned father-in-law coming to sit with his daughter-in-law, and I brought a thermos of coffee and a paperback novel, and I sat in the family waiting area and I listened. You'd be surprised how much you can hear when nobody thinks you're listening. Wesley was on his phone in the corridor for 40 minutes that afternoon. I caught pieces, should be scheduled by Thursday. The policy limits are $250. Fitch says the billing clears faster if the authorization goes through today. He had his back to me. He was watching the nurses' station, not the waiting room. $250. $250,000. Amanda had a supplemental disability and medical insurance policy through Wesley's employer, a mid-level logistics company, decent benefits, the kind of package that includes a high surgical payout for major spinal procedures. I knew about the policy because Wesley had asked me 2 years ago whether he should increase the coverage tier. I told him yes, standard advice. Always increase your coverage when you can. I thought about that advice now and felt something I can only describe as ice water moving slowly through my chest. I drove home. I called my attorney. Then I called a man I'd worked with on that federal audit, a former investigator with the Ohio Department of Insurance, retired now, but he still knew people. He still knew how to pull threads. Give me 48 hours, he said. 48 hours. I went back to the hospital both days. I sat with Amanda. I held her hand. I brought her the orange sherbet she liked. She'd mentioned it once, 2 Christmases ago, and I'd remembered. She was quieter than usual. Her eyes moved toward the door every time Wesley came in. Once, when he stepped out to take a call, she looked at me, and she started to say something. I didn't. She began. And then the door opened, and she closed her mouth. I squeezed her hand twice. She looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod I had. I know already. Her eyes filled. She looked away. On the 3rd day, my investigator friend called me back. He had the policy details. He had the billing codes Dr. Fitch had pre-submitted to the insurance carrier, Spinal Fusion, L4L5, estimated payout $247,000 after deductible. He had a record of 3 previous cases associated with Fitch where similar patterns appeared, and he had something else, a note buried in Wesley's employment HR file, showing that he had changed the primary beneficiary on a separate life insurance policy 4 months ago. Changed it from Amanda to himself. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Kroger, and I read through everything my friend had sent me. It took about 20 minutes. When I finished, I put my phone in my pocket, and I sat there and I was very, very still. This is the part that people don't talk about when these things happen, not the anger. The anger comes later, and it is manageable. What comes first is grief. It is a specific kind of grief, the kind that arrives when something you believed was solid turns out to have been hollow for a long time, maybe always, and you were the last to know. I had loved my son without reservation for 41 years. I had co-signed his first car loan. I had lent him $40,000 when his first business venture collapsed, and I had told him he didn't need to pay it back. And I had meant it. He was my child. He was the only thing I had left of his mother, and he had walked his wife into a hospital and was trying to have her cut open for money. I drove home. I made dinner. I did not cry. I decided what I was going to do, and I needed a clear head to do it. I called Priscilla that evening and told her what I had. I told her I was going to the state insurance fraud division the next morning and that I needed her to write down the timeline of what she had observed. Not for me, for the investigators. She was quiet on the phone for a moment. "I've already written it down," she said. "I wrote it the night after I called you. I just needed to know someone was going to do something with it." Good woman. Good, quiet, brave woman. I told her so. The state insurance fraud investigator I spoke with the next morning was a woman named Carol Deming, and she was exactly the kind of person you want in that role. Unhurried, precise, not easily impressed, and not easily alarmed. She listened to everything I told her. She looked at the materials my friend had compiled. She asked me 11 questions, and every single one of them was the right question. "Mr. Aldridge," she said at the end, "I'm going to need you to not contact your son or the physician for the next 2 weeks. Can you do that?" "I've been a CPA for 33 years, I said. "I know how to wait for the numbers to settle." She almost smiled. "Good." The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I visited Amanda every day. On the 7th day, she was transferred to a step-down room. The surgical team had been quietly delaying the procedure at the request of the insurance carrier, who had flagged the claim for administrative review. Wesley was frustrated. I could see it in the way he moved. The shorter sentences, the silences that stretched a beat too long when I asked him simple questions. He was a man watching something he'd counted on start to slip. He asked me twice whether I had any connections who could help speed up the insurance process. Both times I said I'd see what I could do. Both times I had absolutely no intention of doing anything of the sort. Amanda was getting better on her own. The bruising was fading. The pain was manageable with anti-inflammatories. Her physical therapist told her privately, and Amanda told me later, that her mobility was returning faster than expected for someone who supposedly needed spinal fusion. Amanda had started asking questions. She told me, the day before everything came apart, that she had called her own doctor, the GP she'd had for 10 years, and described her symptoms, and he had told her that nothing she described sounded like an L4, L5 fusion case. "I think Wesley paid him," she said. She meant Dr. Fitch. Her voice was flat and very quiet, and there was a kind of devastation in it that I recognized because I was carrying the same thing. "I think they're trying to—" She stopped. She looked at her hands. "How long have you known?" "A little while," I said. "I fell down 4 stairs, she said. 4 stairs. I bruised my tailbone. I was embarrassed. He said we should go to the hospital just to be safe." She looked at me then, and I saw it in her face. The moment a person understands that the person they trusted most chose money over their body, over their safety, over their life. I didn't even want to go. I reached over and put my hand on hers. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," I said, "but if you're willing to talk to the investigators, it helps. You don't have to decide right now." She nodded once. That was enough. On a Wednesday morning, 14 days after Carol Deming had asked me to wait, 2 investigators from the Ohio Department of Insurance arrived at Mercy General with a warrant. They served Dr. Fitch in his office at 8:15 a.m. They were at Wesley's workplace at 9:15. By 10 o'clock, Wesley was in a conference room answering questions with a lawyer he'd had to call that morning, unprepared, scrambling, because he had not seen this coming. He had not seen it coming because I had not given him any reason to. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria with a cup of coffee when my phone rang, and it was Wesley's number. I let it ring. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was 9 seconds long, and I have never listened to it. I deleted it the same afternoon. Some things do not need to be heard. The investigation took 4 months. Dr. Fitch surrendered his medical license as part of a negotiated settlement and paid $380,000 in civil penalties. The criminal case against him is still moving through the courts. Wesley was charged with insurance fraud and conspiracy, felonies in Ohio with real sentencing guidelines. His attorney worked out a plea that avoided prison time in exchange for full restitution, 5 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent record that will follow him for the rest of his life. I was there for none of the legal proceedings. I didn't need to be. I had done my part. Amanda filed for divorce 3 weeks after she was discharged. I don't know exactly where she is living now. She moved out of state, started fresh somewhere I won't name here because it is not my story to tell. She calls me on Father's Day. She called me this past June, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular. About her new job. About a dog she had adopted. About a hiking trail near where she lives. Before she hung up, she said, "You know you're still my favorite father-in-law." I laughed because it was the first time I'd laughed in a while. She laughed too. It felt like something. Wesley and I have not spoken since that morning in the hospital cafeteria when I told him I needed to run an errand and left. I don't know what I would say if he called. I don't know if I would answer. He is my son, and I love him the way you love the memory of who someone was before you understood who they had become. That is not the same as forgiving them. I don't know if it ever will be. I still use the chipped mug. Every morning, first cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen counter in the quiet before the day starts. My wife gave me that mug the year we bought this house, and she has been gone for 11 years, and every single morning I think about her. I think she would have handled all of this better than I did. She was always better at the grief part. But she also would have made the same calls I made. She believed in accountability. She would have sat across from Carol Deming and answered those 11 questions and then driven home and made dinner and not cried, the same as I did. I like to think that's where Wesley got his stubbornness from her, not from me. I like to think a lot of things. They don't always hold up in the light, but in the early morning, with the coffee and the quiet and the mug she gave me, they hold up well enough. I still think about the moment I sat in that hospital cafeteria and made the choice not to pick up the phone. It would have been easier to answer, to say, "Wesley, I know what you did, and I need you to explain it to me." Part of me wanted that. Part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation that would make it make sense, that I had misread the numbers, misunderstood the paperwork, projected something onto a situation that was actually innocent. I am his father. Fathers want to be wrong about these things. But I had spent 33 years following evidence, not hope. And the evidence was clear. There is something people don't tell you about the kind of betrayal that comes from inside your own family. They talk about anger, and yes, the anger comes. But what arrives first is a kind of reckoning with yourself. A quiet, uncomfortable question. Did I raise this? Did something I did or didn't do create the conditions for this? I sat with that question for a long time. I don't have a clean answer. I know I gave Wesley everything I could. I also know that giving everything to a person is not the same as teaching them what it costs. Maybe I made things too easy for too long. Maybe the $40,000 I forgave too quickly taught him that consequences were negotiable. Few will probably never know. What I do know is that Priscilla made a phone call she didn't have to make. She had nothing to gain and something real to lose. Her job, her professional standing, the comfortable distance of not getting involved. She made the call anyway, at 7 in the morning, in a low and careful voice, because she had seen something wrong and she could not bring herself to look away from it. That is a particular kind of integrity that does not announce itself. It just acts. I think about her more than she probably realizes. And I think about Amanda, who sat in that hospital bed and started a sentence she couldn't finish. I didn't. 2 words. She was trying to tell me she hadn't chosen this, hadn't known, hadn't agreed to any of it. She was trying to tell me that even surrounded by people who were supposed to love her, she had been alone with something unbearable. It took courage to start that sentence. It took more courage to trust the nod I gave her back. She had every reason not to trust anyone in that room. She trusted me anyway. And then she went and built something new somewhere else, and she calls me on Father's Day, and that is worth more to me than I know how to say. What this whole thing taught me, if I'm being honest, the way you can only be honest when enough time has passed, is that the life you end up with is built out of the small decisions you make when nobody is watching and nothing is forcing your hand. Priscilla didn't have to call. Carol Deming didn't have to ask the right 11 questions. Amanda didn't have to trust a nod from an old man in a hospital chair. I didn't have to wait, be patient, follow the numbers instead of the grief. Every one of those choices was made freely, in a quiet moment, with no guarantee it would amount to anything. Wesley made his choices freely too. That is the hardest part to sit with. Not that he was somehow broken or misled, but that he had the same freedom the rest of us had, and he used it differently. I still use the chipped mug. The coffee is still hot in the morning. The house is still quiet in a way that is mostly peaceful and only sometimes lonely. I am 67 years old, and I have learned that integrity is not a dramatic thing. It is just the accumulation of what you do when it would be easier not to. That's enough. Most days, that is more than enough.